Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're taking a look at yet another Japan-only PS1 game. Of course, it's just, the never-ending amount of them that I just keep discovering about. Well, this one happens to be Magnetic Power Microman Generation 2000. Well, holy shit, what a title. So the game was developed by Barnhouse Effect and was published by Takara and was released in 1999. So the game didn't even come out in the year 2000. What a fucking joke. I guess it's just like Blues Brothers 2000. Well, whatever. So the interesting thing with this game is that it's based after a toy line from the 1970s from Takara themselves. And what's really interesting is that when some of the toys were brought over here in North America, some of them were actually tied to the Transformers toys, so technically, this has a connection to Transformers. And there was even an anime that got made around the same time when this game came out. It might be interesting to take a look at it at some point. But yes, one thing I do have to mention briefly before we really start talking about the game is that whenever I think of the word Microman, I can't help but get reminded of the really old PC game I used to play as a kid called Microman. It was like a Mega Man clone, and yes, it's actually a lot better than the Mega Man games released on DOS. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else remembers it, but it was one that I definitely remember as a kid. But anyways, now onto the main game itself. So this is an action-adventure game where you get to play as one or two characters, being Microman and Microlady. And all you need to do is go through many rooms and floors and clear out some enemies while also collecting various items, such as key cards to get through doors that are locked. And there's also many parts where you gotta push around some blocks using your magnetic powers. Now, does this basic description sound familiar? Yeah, it almost kinda sounds like a Zelda game. And you know what? You'd be kinda right. Yeah, like the way how the map is laid out looks kinda similar to a dungeon map within a Zelda game, and also just the two things I just explained also sound like that. Even the way how you jump across platforms is also the same way as in Ocarina of Time, where you're running over the edge, you'll just automatically jump over to the next one. So I don't really want to quite call this game like a Zelda-style game, but it does have a lot of aspects of it that do remind me of a Zelda game. Like one feature that is in this game is that you can actually do like little mini-games every once in a while where you can do a motorcycle stage and start shooting at shit. And there's even a flying ship section where the gameplay style kind of reminds me of Space Harrier. So yes, other than this, you also get to beat up some big bosses, whether it be with hand-to-hand combat or being able to charge up some shots. Now outside of the story mode, there is also one other interesting mode you can do, is that there's actually a versus mode, and you get a pretty decent sized amount of characters to select from, and you just gotta kill each other. So that's the very basics of what I can say for now. Of course I know there's other things you're probably wondering about, like what's the difference between Microman and Microlady's story, and I'll get there. But first, let's talk about the game's controls. And I can say they're pretty decent once you get the hang of them. So the big thing I have to get out of the way first with the controls is that yes, this is a game with tank controls. And yes, I'm normally okay with tank controls, mostly within horror games or games that don't really utilize a lot of jumping aspects to them. But in this game, I actually didn't mind them for it. Well, for one thing, you can actually use the analog sticks, which is a huge surprise. And two, when you turn yourself around, you just press back, and the way how it turns around is actually very smooth and quick. And the same thing of what I said about jumping over a ledge where it just jumps over automatically like in Ocarina of Time, I think it makes more sense to have jumping like that for a game of tank controls. So yes, I know not everyone's gonna love the tank control aspect of it, and I totally understand, but honestly, for what they had to work with, I think they did a pretty good job with the movement. It's just like I said, it just takes a little bit of time to get the hang of it. But as for the rest of the controls, they're pretty easy to understand. So the circle button does the magnetic hook, which allows you to push and pull different objects, and you can even use it as a grappling hook as well. Square allows you to attack, and if you're up close to an enemy, you'll start doing melee attacks, but if you hold the circle button, then allows you to do a charge shot, and the longer you charge it, the more powerful it is. And holding down the X button while moving allows you to run, and thankfully you can actually run while holding a charge shot, which is nice. Triangle is your basic action button to pick up stuff or activate switches. The start button brings up your map and inventory, and even the guy that gives you helpful info, kinda like Metal Gear. Pressing R1 allows you to face directly towards your enemy. And L2 and R2 allow you to change the different camera perspectives. So you got third person over the shoulder mode, and then you also have like fixed camera angle mode. Personally, I found that the third person mode was a lot easier to just get around for the most part. The only time that the fixed camera angle mode was helpful was when I had to find a switch, but it was hidden in a place that it was hard to see it in the third person mode. But in the fixed camera angle mode, they basically just highlighted exactly where it was. But outside of that, I would recommend staying in the third person mode. And one thing that is actually really annoying is that it always seems like that whenever you go to like a new area or whenever you get done doing a certain event, it always changes back to the fixed camera angle mode. It's like this game really wanted you to play with this mode like desperately. So that's a control layout, pretty easy once you understand everything. And they are pretty responsive. The only thing that I will say is that the game's combat is very, very basic, and it also does feel a little bit on the sluggish side, but it's not terrible. I find doing the charge shot feels a lot more responsive, but it just takes a bit more time to kill off enemies, so a lot of the times I end up just having to just tap square a bunch of times and just kill all the bastards. But I do think that Micro Lady's moveset does look kind of cool, like when she does like the random backflip at the enemy. Like, I do like that. So overall, I can say that the controls in this game are not bad, but they are a little bit rough around the edges, and I understand that trying to go back to a game in this sort of style is not gonna be for everyone. But hey, to give them credit, at least they actually tried making a game using the analog sticks. You'd be surprised how many late entry PS1 games don't even utilize them. So now, let's get moving on to the other things, like the graphics. And for a PS1 game in 1999 using 3D graphics, I gotta say, I think it looks really good. So firstly, there's a lot of nice bright colors in this game, which makes sense given that it's based after a toy line that was also very bright and colorful. And the character models are done really well for the time too, for like I said, they're all bright and colorful, they have some nice details here and there. Also, I can't help but think that Micro Lady's design definitely reminds me of something out of Fight Icer 1. So I do actually love that. But yeah, even the other character models are good too, like even like some of the villains, like the boss characters look really cool as well. And some of the enemy designs in general are done well, but I do find that they do get recycled quite a lot, and I wish there was a little bit more variety. And while the backgrounds are not dull looking, I do think that there also needs to be a little bit more variety with like the different settings you get to do, because throughout like most of the game, you're mostly in this like huge like factory looking setting, and I don't know, I wish there was a little bit more that the game could have showed off. Like I would have loved to have seen like more like outside areas. Well, I guess you do get that within, like, the minigame modes, but, I mean, I really just want that to be with, like, the walking around sections. Like, having, like, a forest section, or, like, a big city section, or just, you know, something like that. I think that would have been really nice. But other than these, like, minor things, though, I do think that the rest of the game at least has, like, a really nice art style going for it that I think makes it age a lot better than a lot of, like, the earlier 3D PS1 games. Like, yes, obviously, it still looks like a PS1 game, but at least it has a nice enough art style that at least makes it look kinda cool and intriguing. And now, as for the game's music, the music in this game, I think is quite nice. I like it. It does have some pretty cool sounding tracks here and there. Nothing super memorable, but I think it is fitting for the game. Like, it definitely sounds like background music from an anime. So it has like a little bit of piano and jazz, and has a bit of rock and all that. And it's really not a bad OST at all, it's just nothing that's like super grand and amazing. And now, if you want to go out and buy yourself a copy of this game, if you have a way to play an actual physical copy of it, well, there is a couple copies I've seen surprisingly, and they usually go for about $40, but I did see some going for about $90, which is dumb, but you know, if it's $40, I mean, I can say that's actually not bad for a very obscure game like this that's at least somewhat playable without knowing Japanese. Now, before we get into my overall thoughts on this game, there is one section you probably realize that I forgot to mention, and yeah, I didn't mention the story at all. And here's the thing, I could not find like a basic rundown on what the story's about. All I had to go with was just whatever was in the game, and from what I can tell, it seems like very basic shit. So depending if you pick the boy or the girl, you'll start off in a hospital, you get struck by lightning, and then your character gets to turn into the Microman, and then after that, you just gotta like save the other Micromen, and then there's also like other like villains you just gotta beat the shit out of, and yeah, basically that's all there is to it. And as for the differences, it just seems like it's just the cutscenes are different, where, you know, you pick the girl, you'll be a girl in the cutscenes. You pick the guy, you'll be a guy in the cutscenes. And I played through the game as Micro Lady, but when I wanted to try Micro Man to see if there, like, was any differences, from what I played, there didn't really seem like much. Like, all the levels were the same, unless maybe there might be, like, something that's different, like, way later on, but I highly doubt it. So yeah, it literally just seems like it's just different character model will appear at, like, different cutscenes. That's literally the main difference from what I gathered. So now that we got that over with, okay, so what are my overall thoughts on this game? So, I can say that this is a game that I actually did kinda like. I mean, I didn't, like, absolutely love it, I didn't think it was amazing, but I kinda enjoyed my time with it. Like, the game wasn't, like, brutally hard or anything. In fact, the game's actually very forgiving for that. Whenever you do die, you actually start back up, like, where, like, you left off, and you get all your health back. So it was kind of a nice playthrough for that, but there is one thing about this game that is a little bit hard to play, but that's mainly because of the language barrier. Because there were a few parts in this game that did have me a little bit stuck, and it wasn't because that the game was like bullshit cryptic or anything. Actually, the game is pretty straightforward for the most part. The problem is that because I can't read the guy's like little helpful advice when I had to do the codec thing, it was tricky to figure out unless I like used my phone with Google Translate app and translated it. And whenever it translated it right, it actually was very helpful, and I was like, wow, that's all you needed to do? Well, okay, the game literally straight up like tells you everything what you're supposed to do. But whenever the app got the translation wrong, then that's kind of where I was like, okay, I basically just had to fuck around as much as I can. And sadly, as I'm doing this, there's no walkthroughs. Watch what's gonna happen. As soon as this video goes online, there's gonna be like a bunch of walkthroughs all of a sudden. But all joking aside though, if this game was in English, the game would not be cryptic at all, but because I can't read this shit, then it makes the game a bit more trickier to play. But it's not impossible, like I said, I was able to figure it out without a walkthrough. But I can definitely say right now, it would be a tough game to recommend to most people. But even if the game was fan translated though, I still think that the game is like decent at best. Like, it's not fantastical, but it's also not the worst thing that I ever played. It's a very simple, straightforward action-adventure game with some beat-em-up and shooting elements. So if you're in the middle of playing this, like, really big game with, like, a lot of content to it, I'm not gonna be like, yo, put that shit down, and you gotta play this game right now. Because like I just said, I'm pretty sure most people that would play a game like this, I think they probably would rather just wait for a fan translation or a decent walkthrough. But I can say for myself, I did like the game for what it is. Like I said, it's decent, not amazing and fantastical, but also not like awful or unplayable or anything. I thought it was kinda cool and interesting. And if I had to compare this game to another game that I reviewed somewhat recently, it kinda reminds me of that Grandal game on PS1, where that's another game that was like, you know, it was decent, I had fun with it, but I know that like it's something that I probably do like more than most people would. And ironically, both games have, like, characters and, like, powered armor sort of thing. So yeah, personally, I think it's a decent game. Maybe has some rough spots here and there, and also does have some things that I wish it could improve on. But I also think it would be a better experience to play this game if you can either A, read Japanese, or B, wait for a fan translation, or C, actually wait for a walkthrough on YouTube or GameFAQs or something. So with that being said, thanks for watching, commenting, and have yourselves a great day.
Macro Mike with a macro cock!